Hi everyone, and welcome back to Bowdie Shorts, making law make sense in 15 minutes or less. Now, so far in our trust series, we've spent a lot of time looking at what trustees are supposed to do. We've looked at trustee powers, trustee duties, investment obligations, and fiduciary duties. But what happens when trustees get it wrong? Today's video starts our examination of remedies against trustees. And the key question is, if a trustee causes the trust to lose money, who pays? Well, the answer lies in personal claims. So let's look at the big picture here. So whenever trust property is lost, damaged, or mismanaged, beneficiaries have two options, either personal claims or proprietary claims. Today, in this video, we focus on personal claims and we'll save proprietary claims for the next video in the series. So what's a personal claim? Well, a personal claim is a claim for monetary compensation. The beneficiaries seek compensation from the trustee personally. In other words, the trustee pays from their own pocket. And that is why personal claims are sometimes called claims in personam. Now, why is this important? Well, because a personal claim is only as valuable as the trustee's ability to pay. So if a trustee has substantial assets, a personal claim may be extremely attractive. If the trustee is insolvent, the position is very different. So when might a personal claim be a bad idea? Well, let's imagine a trustee loses £100,000 of trust money. If the trustee is bankrupt, there may be little point pursuing compensation, because even if the claim succeeds, there may be no money available to satisfy the judgment. So when is a personal claim the right remedy? Well, personal claims are especially useful when trust property has been lost, investments have been mishandled, trust assets have fallen in value because of trustee wrongdoing, and there is no specific trust property that can be recovered. In those situations, compensation may be the only realistic remedy. So let's look at an example. Suppose a trustee makes disastrous investment decisions. The trust fund falls from £250,000 to zero. The worthless investments remain trust property. Nothing has been taken out of the trust. The beneficiaries therefore need compensation. This would point towards a personal claim. Now, before beneficiaries can recover anything, they must establish a breach of trust. So the trustee must have breached a duty. Remember, all the duties we've studied so far, duty of care, investment duties, fiduciary duties, duties of supervision, and duties to act personally. Well, a personal claim starts with identifying which of these duties has been breached. So as an example, suppose two trustees sign blank cheques. One trustee later uses those cheques to steal £50,000. The thief has obviously breached trust. But what about the other trustee? Well, by signing blank cheques and failing to supervise properly, that trustee may very well have also breached the trust. Now, trustees are not automatically liable for everything their co-trustees do. There is no general rule of one trustee does something wrong, so everybody becomes liable. Instead, each trustee must have committed their own breach of trust. That brings us on now to which trustees can be sued. Well, any trustee who has breached trust and caused loss can be sued. Beneficiaries do not need to sue every trustee involved, and this is because trustee liability is usually joint and several. And this is a favourite exam topic. So joint and several liability means every wrongdoing trustee is potentially liable for the whole loss. So as an example, suppose two trustees cause the trust to lose £200,000. The beneficiaries can sue both trustees or either trustee individually. In either case, the claim is for the entire £200,000. Now, why does this matter? Well, because beneficiaries are practical people. If one trustee is wealthy and another trustee is broke, who do you think the beneficiaries will sue? Well, you're right, usually the wealthy trustee, and this is perfectly permissible under joint and several liability. Now, breach of trust alone, though, is not enough. The beneficiaries must also prove causation. They must show that the breach actually caused the loss, and that brings us back to an old friend of ours, the but-for test. So the question is, would the loss have happened but for the trustee's breach? If the answer is yes, the claim would fail. If the answer is no, causation is established. So let's return to our example of the blank check. So one trustee signs blank checks, the other steals £50,000. Would the theft have happened without the signed blank checks? Probably not. Therefore, the breach helped to cause the loss. Now, investment claims are trickier. These become much more challenging because investment losses happen all the time. Not every investment loss gives rise to liability, and trustees are not required to be perfect. They simply need to act reasonably. And this brings us to the really important case in this area of Nestlé and National Westminster Bank. In this case, the trustees were heavily criticised. They had failed to review investments properly. They had failed to understand their powers, and they had failed to manage the trust effectively. And yet, the beneficiary still lost. Why? Well, because the beneficiary could not prove that the trustees' failures actually caused the loss complained of. So the court accepted that another reasonable trustee might have invested in much the same way. Therefore, causation could not be established. Now, looking at this in exam terms, when we're looking at investment claims, always ask, was this merely a poor outcome, or was it a decision no reasonable trustee would have made? And that distinction matters enormously. So how much can the beneficiary recover? Well, if the claim succeeds, the trustee must compensate the trust for the full loss suffered, plus interest. And the purpose is to restore the trust fund to the position it would have occupied had the breach never occurred. In terms of defences, trustees are not always liable, and several important defences may apply. Firstly, exemption clauses. So a trust deed may contain a clause limiting trustee liability, and these clauses often protect trustees against innocent mistakes or negligent errors. However, fraud cannot be excluded. So a trustee cannot steal trust property and hide behind an exemption clause. Next, we have the defense of beneficiary consent. If fully informed adult beneficiaries consent to conduct that constitutes a breach of trust, they generally cannot later complain about it. But that consent must be informed, freely given, and given by adults with capacity. Let's now look at Section 61 of the Trustee Act 1925, and this is another key examination provision. So the court may excuse trustees who acted honestly, acted reasonably, and ought fairly to be excused. So as an example, suppose a lay trustee misunderstands a technical trust rule and makes an honest mistake. The court may conclude that liability would be unfair. So Section 61 gives the court flexibility in those situations. In saying that, passive trustees do need to beware, because courts are reluctant to rescue trustees who simply do nothing. A trustee who allows others to run the trust without supervision often receives little sympathy, and equity expects trustees to be actively involved. Final couple to consider: limitation periods. Firstly, personal claims do not last forever. Most breach of trust claims are subject to a 6-year limitation period, and this normally runs from the date of the breach. However, there are exceptions to this, and special rules do apply for minors, for remainder beneficiaries, and for fraudulent trustees, and fraudsters gain no benefit from limitation period. Now, equity also has its own doctrine called laches, L-A-C-H-E-S. This prevents claims where the beneficiary knew about the problem, delayed unreasonably, and the delay causes prejudice. And equity dislikes people who just sleep on their rights. Now let's return to joint and several liability. Suppose one trustee pays the entire judgment. Can that trustee recover money from the others? Well, the answer is often yes, under the principles of indemnity and contribution. Now, an indemnity can transfer the whole burden to another trustee, and this commonly occurs where one trustee acted fraudulently, one trustee dominated the others, or one trustee personally benefited. The responsibility may ultimately therefore land on that trustee. Alternatively, a trustee may seek contribution, and this allows liability to be shared. The court decides what proportion is fair. The greater the blameworthiness, the greater the contribution. So let's bring this all together. Every personal claim follows the same basic structure. Step 1, identify a breach of trust. Step 2, establish causation. Step 3, calculate the loss. Step 4, consider any defences. And step 5, consider indemnity or contribution between the trustees. So what's Bowdie's bottom line here? Well, personal claims are all about compensation. Remember, trustees must breach a duty. The breach must cause loss. Liability is usually joint and several, and beneficiaries can recover the full loss plus interest. Trustees may rely on exemption clauses, consent, Section 61, or limitation, and trustees can seek indemnities or contributions from co-trustees, because at the heart of every personal claim is one simple question: has the trustee's wrongdoing caused the trust to lose money? If the answer is yes, a personal claim may follow. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Bowdie Shorts. There'll be further videos in our trust series available on the YouTube channel soon. Thank you.